Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. The spice must flow. Yes, I couldn't help myself. Following yesterday's video, looking at David Lynch's Dune, I had to go back further, or forwards, depending on what perspective you will have on it, and look at the documentary surrounding the 1974 botched attempt at making a Dune adaptation, that is the Jodorowsky Dune. I've talked a lot about the creative journey and about the relationship between artist and production in terms of like financier, studio. And there is a very black and white interpretation that you have a group of artists who don't have money to make films, and so therefore have to make deals with the devil to get their films made, but compromise their vision. I have never been in that camp of people, because as much as we like the idea that artists with no restraints will make the greatest stories ever told, particularly in film, it's not. I don't believe it, partly because I believe that film is a collaborative process, and partly because I think that the film making process requires multiple voices to almost give shape and meaning to a visionary's vision. Of course, famously, you have Heaven's Gate being the example of a filmmaker with no restrictions being allowed to make whatever he wanted, and it being a colossal failure because what could be made could not... What was in the mind of the director could not live up to what could be made at the time, and so it ended up being a over-budget, over-bloated, colossal waste of time. Sorry, I've given away how I feel about Heaven's Gate. But Jodorowsky's Dune is... It's one of those... It's almost a demonstration of how sometimes a film not being made can have more of an impact on film culture than its existence. Because the documentary, of course, follows Alejandro Jodorowsky, the famed filmmaker who did El Topo, and then of course tried to do Dune, and has had a long and illustrious career, and sort of primarily follows him as he sort of recollects his journey, and we are shown, all the storyboards, where we talk to his producer, we talk to storyboard artist, or the widow of a storyboard artist, and composers, and all the people who were involved at a certain level in the pre-production on this adaptation of Dune. And then, of course, you've got filmmakers who are brought on, like Richard Stanley, to talk about the impact of the film. And it's one of those remarkable situations where Alejandro Jodorowsky is almost not a... He's not a filmmaker, insofar as he is a filmmaker, but he is, I suppose, in a world in which cynical filmmaking... We've almost reached a point where filmmaking is as much a money-making venture as it is an art form, where we aren't really able to separate one from the other because of the nature of the scale of these productions, and the ambition and the creative sort of realization. There isn't a situation where an artist can go away and make a film and it be this brilliant piece of art and get a great film. It does happen, but it's exceedingly rare, because we're currently in an age of IP factories, and I'll expand upon that in a minute. Whereas the 70s was almost an era where we're sort of leaving the early, the sort of the golden age of Hollywood, and we're about to reach that sort of Wild West era where things are becoming more experimental, less traditional storytelling, less traditional production styles, bringing in, you know, directors who are more willing to be more experimental and take risks in Hollywood. And of course, this is the period in which science fiction is hugely expanding. You know, Star Wars, the original, is only around the corner. It's only a few years out. But Hollywood is clearly at a point where they are wanting to sort of say, okay, let's you know, where now we are in the IP factory era, where studios are looking for IPs and then saying, okay, how do we best adapt or recreate or envision this IP in some capacity. In the 70s, it was, and it went on for a long time, past the 70s, it was very much a, who is the visionary director who we can bring in, whose name will have enough clout that people will go to see a film. Other than that, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as we have, you know, a Scorsese or a Spielberg or a Kubrick. They can make whatever they want because they are visionaries, and we simply know that they will fill the box office simply by their name alone. And of course that led to a lot of experimentation and led to a lot of crazy ideas that somehow were realised, you know, sort of the Xanadus of the world, and you have that strange sense of where was the restraint, and you know, were the money pots unlimited? And Jodorowsky's Dune is a demonstration where, yes, there was a limitation, but man, this production got well underway before that could happen. And of course, the great tragedy of it is that Jodorowsky is a visionary. There is something about, even watching him at the age of 80 talk about his experience and talk about his vision and talk about his, you know, sort of who he is as a creative, you can't help but be sucked into sort of his charisma. And yet you can completely understand why everyone who worked with him, no matter how wild and crazy his ideas were, they absolutely believed that he could pull this off. It's and it's one of those strange things where you look at Dune and you think, Dune is this pivotal piece of literature that influenced so much that came after it. I talked in yesterday's video about how I have not got on with the text of the original novel, but I appreciate its importance within science fiction and fantasy storytelling, and the influence it had on things like Star Wars and everything going forward, that genre fiction going forward. But Jodorowsky's Dune, you could almost say, probably takes a huge amount of credit for that as well, because the fact that he had practically an entire film worth of concept art ready to go. You know, we had this sort of page by page by page, minute, second by second, you know, and the beauty of the documentary is that we get an insight into it and we get to see all these remarkable creations and the way that Jodorowsky wanted to sort of envision this world. And the fact that, frankly, he doesn't care about IP. He doesn't care about the source material. He was inspired by it. But frankly, as is the nature of adaptation, he didn't want to just make it. And then, as I say, it's a big question mark we have over this particular era that we are in now, where there is a certain expectation that adaptation means a perfect reenactment of, say, a novel or a comic book, or, you know, whatever source material is being derived from, to honour those fans and to honour the creatives behind it. But the truth of adaptation is the fact that a creative can make whatever they want, you know, and it should very much be in the hands of the creative to take whatever source material and envision it through their style. And Jodorowsky definitely was thinking of that, because the ending that he had in mind was just something else. It was more in keeping with the ending of Highlander than it was with the ending of Dune. But again, it's the idea that this inspired him, and he allowed him to just create his own world, universe, and want to tell this story. And it's, like I say, it's remarkable because this got so far into production until the money people just went, we can't afford this. This is just not happening. You know, it's the crazy stories that came from this. The fact that you had Salvador Dali, who Jodorowsky wanted to play the Emperor. And Salvador Dali said, I will only do this if I get paid for £1 million for every minute of screen I'm on. At which point Jodorowsky said, I can't do that. But what I will do is have you do 1 day's work and then have a robot who will all be all dressed up and sort of slow moving, and he will essentially be you for the rest of the film. Bonkers. It's just bonkers. It's just that level of almost genius, but what is almost genius can ultimately fall into the line of insanity. You know, and the fact that he was saying to the studios, this film could be 12 hours, it could be 14 hours, I just need it to be made. And I've heard these stories before, but when I hear it from the horse's mouth, when I hear Jodorowsky describe it, and when I hear these directors who are hugely inspired, the director of Drive, whose name has just gone out of my head again, he was also interviewed, and he says how inspirational this film process was. And you can see it because you genuinely go, if this had been made, this would be potentially the greatest film ever made, and I think he might have been able to pull it off. Who's to say? It is the Schrodinger's cat of filmmaking, because it doesn't exist, and so it can be whatever we want it to be, and that is the beauty of imagination. And it is, like I say, we live in a very different time in terms of filmmaking. That sort of experience just doesn't happen now. And for good reason, to some degree. But it is a shame that there isn't that sense of Wild West and people just making whatever they want and just seeing what's stuck. And as I say, it inspired so much conceptually. I just love the fact that Jodorowsky went to the script, was forced, he didn't want to go, but he was forced to go to the David Lynch, see the David Lynch film by his sons, and was so delighted because he thought it was terrible. And it meant that David Lynch wasn't going to make this, because he, like many people, in concept, David Lynch would have been perfect for Dune. And Jodorowsky was terrified because he thought, oh, David Lynch is perfect. He's the only person who I could imagine making this correctly. But it means it will, you know, it will destroy me. It will kill me to see this realization perfectly made. And he was delighted when it was the film that it ended up being that I talked about yesterday. Because it meant that it didn't destroy him as a filmmaker. And as I said yesterday, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, I apologise again, yesterday I completely got the name wrong, it quite possibly could absolutely live up to the vision of what Dune could be, and could be this huge, epic fantasy sci-fi saga that transcends our understanding. Or it could just be a very good film. Who's to say? It's only a couple of weeks before we'll find out, but I'm delighted to have seen these two versions, to now have that in my mind going into this experience, because they are two wildly different representations of the filmmaking process and two wildly different representations of what Dune could have been. And it's just, it's fascinating for an examination of film as art form. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because this will help in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 250 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.